Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 15th of April of 2026. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And based on the reports that we are receiving from Ukraine, most likely nobody has doubts that the Russians have launched their major offensive operation of 2026. During the previous 24 hours we received a lot of updates, and the most important is that the Russians are attacking the Ukraine. You know that usually I say that the Russians attack the Ukraine using hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles, but it seems that today, for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation, I would say that the Russians used at least 1,000 of drones and probably 100 of missiles. It seems that currently the Russians are carrying out the biggest attack since the beginning of this conflict, and we are receiving updates about drones and about the missiles almost the previous 24 hours without even a single pause. So what is happening? The Russians, as we discussed several days ago, launched their major offensive operation and in the northern direction. So this is not the Zaporozhye direction, this is not the Dnipro direction, this is not the Slavyansk direction. The Russians decided to attack the Ukraine from the north. And the clashes, very heavy clashes, are recorded around the settlement of Glukhov. Very heavy clashes are recorded around the city of Sumi, and the Russians continue advancing, and during the previous 24 hours, once again, they managed to improve their position significantly. And the Russians continue advancing in the area of the city of Kharkiv in the northeastern part of the Kharkiv region, and today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation even reported that another settlement was taken by Russians. And before all these things, before all these attacks and offensives, of course, the Russians first began attacking the Ukraine with drones. And for example, overnight, between the 14th and the 15th of April of 2026, the Russians attacked the Ukraine. And we have already discussed this map with roads, with explosions, with different types of vehicles, air vehicles that the Russians were using for these purposes. The Minister of Defense of Ukraine stated that overnight the Russians used 327 drones and so on. And this information was published by 7 a.m. of the 15th of April of 2026. And usually after the morning report published by pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians are not attacking anymore. But today is an exception from this rule. According to information we have, after 7 a.m. there was just a small pause, and the Russians began attacking the Ukraine once again using hundreds of drones. So once again, for example, this is the picture of the overnight attack. So we have already discussed the situation. This is the attack between somewhere around 1 a.m. The Russians with drones were moving in the central part of Russia, and when the Russian drones entered the central part of Ukraine, the Russians began concentrating their drones with the purpose to make a decision where to move next. And the main purpose and the main target of the overnight Russian attack was the territory to the west of the city of Kiev. We have already discussed, we have already seen these pictures and these videos, and we suppose that that was the end. So the Russians attacked and that's it. But right after the right at the beginning of 8 a.m. we start receiving more updates on attack. The Russians began publishing updates and videos from different parts of Ukraine. For example, in this video we can see the city of Kryvyi Rog and the Russian drone flying over this territory, and as you can see, the Russian drone didn't have any problems and any issues to record the video and to provide us this video, which means that the Russians have internet connection over the territory of Ukraine. As of now, I'm not sure for sure whether the Russians are using their Bureau 1414 satellite system, or maybe the Russians managed to authorize several Starlink terminals as if they were Ukrainians. So this may be also a solution. Furthermore, we received lots of updates from the city of Ismail. Lots of explosions were recorded. We received lots of updates, lots of attacks from the area of the city of Cherkasy, Belets, Cerkov. We received a video from the city of Sumi. Here we can see how special services of Ukraine were trying to stabilize the situation. We received a video from the city of Kharkiv, but this is the overnight video. More precisely, this is even in the evening of the 14th of April of 2026, when the Russians just started. Lots of videos. And we supposed once again that this is the end. So maybe in an hour, maybe during the next nights, maybe during the next several days, the Russians will repeat or will make another massive attack. But everything has become much faster. And today, somewhere at 2 p.m. of the Ukrainian time, we start receiving the first updates that new batches of drones, new batches of the Russian drones were entering the territory of Ukraine using the same routes of attacks that the Russians used during the nights between the 14th and the 15th. The Russians were entering the territory of Ukraine from the area of the city of Sumi, and as you can see, according to these pictures, the Russians were entering the territory of Ukraine from the area of Kherson through the city of Kryvyi Rog. And later we received another update. This is the situation between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. And this is the latest update that was published at 6 p.m. And here we can see at least two batches of drones from the Russian side that were moving. One of them was moving in the northern parts of Ukraine, the second one in the southern parts of Ukraine. And this is approximately the moment when we start receiving first updates that's probably for the first time for a very long period of time the Russians began attacking the territory of Ukraine with cruise missiles. And this attack is taking place not during the night, but during the period of time when people can see missiles and drones in the skies. And as of the moment when I started making this video, the sources began publishing information that first missiles were entering the territory of Ukraine from the east. These missiles were launched by strategic aviation, and we are talking about Ha-101 missiles. Furthermore, we received reports that several calibers missiles were launched from the area of the Black Sea, but later this information wasn't confirmed. So this night is going to be very, very difficult. We will see lots of updates, lots of explosions. And now the Russians are doing just one thing. They're trying to paralyze the Ukraine at the state with the purpose to allow their forces along the northern direction during the next days to improve their positions significantly. Zelensky, what is Zelensky doing right now? During the previous 24 hours, he made lots of very important statements, and probably this one is the most important. There is currently such a shortage of Patriot systems in Ukraine that it couldn't get any worse. So basically Zelensky is saying that he is no longer able to bring down Russian drones and missiles over the territory of Ukraine. Another important thing, according to information we have, Ukraine will receive Patriot missiles, but of a different modification. So very difficult to say what kind of modification the Ukrainians are going to use. Another important thing, the Ukrainian armed forces have begun producing one Patriot interceptor per missile due to a shortage of ammunition. So which means that it seems, and it means that most likely during the previous months, the Russians, due to the fact that the Russians were attacking the territory of Ukraine, we're talking about massive attacks almost every single 10 days. We believe that during the previous 3 or 4 months, the Russians managed to accumulate a lot of missiles and a lot of drones. And we believe that due to the beginning of the Northern Offensive operation, the next several days, the Russians will attack the territory of Ukraine non-stop, just with one purpose, as was discussed, to paralyze the armed forces of Ukraine, to paralyze the logistics of Ukraine, which will most likely, or the Russians believe that this will allow the Russians to improve their position significantly, especially in the Sumi direction and especially in the Kharkiv direction. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground and let's check how the map changed during the previous day. And first let's talk about the Sumi direction, where several days ago the Russians began their major offensive operation. Pro-Ukrainian sources stated that the Russian armed forces continued to create a buffer zone along the state border in Sumi region. And during the previous days we received lots of updates on this matter, and these are the changes on the ground between the dates. This is the end of the 12th of April of 2026. This is the end of the 4:30th of April. The Russians improved their positions around Miropolye. This is the end of the 14th of April. This is the first day when pro-Ukrainian sources published the updates that the Russians basically broke through Ukraine's border defense and began advancing deep inside of the Sumi region. And this is the end of the 15th of April. The Russians, according to different sources, answered the settlement of Miropolye and captured up to 50% of the village, and the Russians continue advancing. Most likely the Ukrainians will not be able to hold their positions, and the most important that right before the beginning of this major offensive operation, major Sumi offensive operation, if you remember, during February and March of 2026, the Ukrainians counter-attacked in the Zaporozhye direction because the Ukrainians thought that the Zaporozhye direction would be a primary direction for Russians. But now we see that the situation is different. The Russians chose the Sumi and the Kharkiv directions as primary directions, but not the Zaporozhye direction. So this is the current situation. But of course the Russians are keeping their eye on this area. During the previous 24 hours we received, as you can see, lots of updates that the Russians were attacking logistics of the city of Zaporozhye. Several logistics sites were attacked. The city of Dnipro was also under attack by Russians. So the Russians are keeping the Ukrainian forces stressed and always in this area without any chances to abandon their positions in the direction of the city of Sumi. So let's return back to the area of Sumi. As of the previous 24 hours, once again, we received just one small change. We are talking about the settlement of Miropolye. It seems that in coming days, this village would be taken by Russians, and from this very moment, the Russians will be able to maintain their positions along the river in this area that goes through the western parts of the settlement, the river of Psol. And according to my understanding of the situation, the Russians will continue advancing further along the river towards the settlement of Velika Rybitsa, and of course the settlement of Zapsilye also would be attacked by Russians. Furthermore, don't forget about the settlements of Ugroide, Krasnopolye, Novodmitrievka. In coming days we will see additional changes in this area as well. Now, of course, the Ukrainians would be forced to redeploy their forces back in this direction. The question is what kind of forces the Ukrainians are planning to use for this, whether the Ukrainians are going to use forces from the Zaporozhye direction, or the Ukrainians would use forces from the Slavyansk direction. As of now, very difficult to say, but obviously they would be forced to use reserves from some other position. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Kharkiv direction. As we discussed, the city of Kharkiv was under very heavy fire yesterday. Furthermore, we should always keep in our minds that the Russians during the previous days attacked the Pechenegi Dam, which means that most likely they will repeat these attacks until they destroy the Pechenegi Dam. And as soon as they do this, most likely for several weeks, the entire logistics of the northeastern part of the Kharkiv direction from the Ukrainian side would collapse completely. Furthermore, as of the previous day, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation and different mappers stated that Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to improve their positions significantly in the Volchansky direction. So these are the changes on the ground between the dates. The Russians, as of now, as we can see, are focused to establish complete control over the river of Vovcha. So this is the river of Vovcha, and the Russians, it seems, are trying to establish complete control over everything along this red line. So the Russians will try to cross the river of Volcha. The Russians will try to create a stable foothold on the Ukrainian side of the river. Then the Russians will concentrate forces on the Ukrainian side of the river, and then the Russians will begin offensive operation further in the southern direction. But one thing we need to understand that this process won't take months or weeks. Everything is already ready. The only thing the Russians need is to continue pushing, and most likely they will be able to finish the battle for the river just in coming days, maybe weeks, but not months. And then Russians will continue offensive operation further in the southern direction. It seems that the Russians will try to take everything under complete control along the rivers of Seversky Donetsk and Oskol. We are talking about this pocket. I believe that you can see this pocket right now in front of your screens. This is the river of Seversky Donetsk, and this is the river of Oskol, and we understand that, of course, the Russians have more favorable positions because they can have better logistics in this area. The Ukrainians would be always forced to use rivers, use different bridges and so on, with the purpose to bring additional forces on, let's say, the Russian sides of this river, which means that, of course, once again, the Russians most likely will have much more favorable logistics in comparison with the Ukrainian side. Now let's move further. Additional changes on the ground were recorded in the Barova direction, but we believe that these are just small changes, adjustments according to small videos that were published from different sources. So don't think that something important happened there, but maybe the Russians began offensive operation in this area as well. We are waiting for additional updates. The Slavyansk direction. During the previous 24 hours, additional changes were recorded. First of all, and the most important, is that the Russians are intensifying their attacks on the city of Slavyansk, on the city village of Kriva Luka, Nikolaevka, Alexandrovka, with aviation and with artillery. So lots of explosions were recorded. The Russians established complete control over the Ukrainian bank of the river of Seversky Donetsk, trying not to allow the Ukrainians to use logistics for defense purposes, and according to the latest updates that were published by different sources, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to improve their position significantly around the settlement of Kriva Luka. So these are the changes on the ground between the dates. The Russians encircled the settlement of Kriva Luka. I would like to remind you that during the previous days, the Ukrainians were trying to maintain the corridor by counter-attacking in the northern direction, and most likely, according to and due to this configuration of Frontline, the Ukrainians in coming days would retreat from the settlement of Kriva Luka along basically the Russian side of the river of Seversky Donetsk. And maybe this process is already taking place. But from this configuration, if the Russians indeed captured the most strategical elevations in this area, most likely the Ukrainians would not be able to hold their positions for a very long period of time. The city of Konstantinovka. During the previous 24 hours, nothing special was recorded. It seems that the Russians were attacking the city of Konstantinovka and trying to force the Ukrainians to think that the city of Konstantinovka is a primary target for Russians, but it seems that all attacks in the area of the city of Konstantinovka served just with one purpose: to force the Ukrainians to keep their forces in this area while the Russians were preparing the Sumi and the Kharkiv directions as directions for a primary attack. The Zaporozhye direction. During the previous day, the most important update is coming from the territory to the east of the settlement of Velika Mikhailovka. These are the changes on the ground that were provided by different sources. Today, pro-Russian sources stated that the Russians have launched another offensive operation in this area. The Russians, according to information we have, recaptured the settlement of Alexandrograd, and the most important is that the Russians crossed the river of Vovcha, and now the Russians are trying to concentrate their units and their forces on the Ukrainian side of the river, on the territory of this big, huge forest. And from these positions, the Russians most likely in coming days will continue offensive operations further in the direction of Velika Mikhailovka and in the direction of the settlement of Gavrilovka from the south. And according to this situation, most likely in coming days, the Russians will continue their attacks in the direction of Gavrilovka from the settlement of Ivanovka. I would like to remind you that several months ago, somewhere at the beginning of 2026, the Russians attacked in this direction, but for some reason they stopped and returned to their, let's say, basic positions. Maybe now they will make another attempt to do this. As for the city of Orekhov, during the previous day, we haven't received anything special. The Russians were bombing and attacking the settlement, searching for positions of FPV drone operators of the armored forces of Ukraine. And the city of Kherson, once again, and almost every single day, we receive updates of how Russians attacked the city with aviation, with artillery. During the previous 24 hours, we received additional updates on this matter. And this video, we can see almost reduced to ruins a building on the central part of the settlement. We receive almost every single day videos how Russians attacked vehicles of the armored forces of Ukraine with FPV drones. So this direction continue being very, very hot. It seems that the Russians are keeping their eye on this city, but without attempts to make any decisive steps. But it seems that in coming days the Russians may try to do this, because if the Russians are planning to carry out any Kherson offensive operation, this is possible only during the spring or summer period of time. So if Russians have some plans to take on the complete control of the city of Kherson, this must happen within the next weeks, but not during autumn, or of course not during the winter period of time. And that's it for today. The Military with Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.